My name is Aslak Orre. I will moderate this event. I'm a senior researcher here at the Christian Michelsen Institute. I have been focusing on Mozambique in my research since 1997, when I first went there for a year as a research assistant. And since then, I have been writing a master's degree and a PhD. So that I think you can imagine that also for me, given the enormous tumults that are taking place in Mozambique these days, it's a very special situation. These are truly special days. I shall duly introduce the panel shortly, the ones who are here with me and as well as on screen. But allow me to say a few words to set the stage. The Frelimo party in Mozambique has held power in the country for the last 49 years since they came to power after independence, or after having led the independence struggle against Portugal. It has until now enjoyed a seemingly impregnable hegemony, and this is what now appears to be breaking. And indeed, one of the founding members of Frelimo, Elder Martins, said that we are now witnessing the worst political crisis of Frelimo since independence. I think that is, if anything, an understatement, because the crisis is not only for Frelimo, it's also for the population per se, and it also has the possibilities of setting in stage a wider international crisis, I believe. So, given the audience, I don't know how much I should say as a background to the crisis, but just to say that evidently we should come back to the background. The crisis has a long build-up and a story, but it came to the fore on the 9th of October, after the general elections, the presidential and legislative elections on that date. The key people here are President Nyusi, who must leave in office in January after fulfilling his term. Frelimo's new candidate for president is Daniel Chapo. He is hitherto an unknown political figure, a compromise candidate of sorts. The two large opposition parties, Renamo and the MDM, fielded rather uncharismatic older men as candidates. But the fourth candidate was the more popular 50-year-old Venancio Mondlane, and he has, in these few weeks since the elections, been propelled into the country's central political figure, without doubt. A few days after the election, the National Electoral Commission announced a Frelimo victory of 78% of the votes for the parliament and 71% for its candidate, Daniel Chapo. But Venancio Mondlane said he could prove he had won. And so started the demonstrations. The assassination of Mondlane's lawyer, as well as another party leader of his party, on the 19th of October, further inflamed the situation. Venancio Mondlane then went into hiding. We don't know where he is at the moment, but he communicates through almost daily live messages or transmissions on YouTube and reaches an enormous audience in Mozambique through this, it seems. So then started the actions, which have now gone on for six weeks, and it includes strikes and marches, roadblocks, port and border blockades, and many days of general strikes. The police have been repressing with the bullets and tear gas, but many have fought back, and masses of angry people have trashed police stations, as well as the Frelimo party offices. Medical staff and teachers have striked, and students post videos of defiantly chanting Venancio, Venancio, which is the name of the opposition candidate, in direct defiance of the university authorities. So at times, this seems like a veritable festival of freedom. At moments later, it looks as if anarchy is spreading and catastrophe might be looming. This, I think, is the stage, as well as this very stage. Before discussing this intense situation, we are going to show you some pictures. And we have to say, our plan this morning was that we were going to have a quick presentations of the pictures by Luisa Nhantumbo, the photographer, who is a prize-winning human rights documentarist photographer. She sent us a video this morning in Portuguese where she explained the reasons why she could not be here, and that is exactly because of she needed to prioritize being present and document the demonstrations of today. Instead, we are going to have an excellent stand-in, which is Carmelisa Rosario, who will take us talk us through the pictures. Carmelisa is an anthropologist, Mozambican, working on gender inequality and social justice themes. She's also a postdoc researcher here at CMI and working on a project about the war in northern Mozambique. With that, we will be looking at the pictures, and after that, I will present the rest of the panel.
So I'm not sure how good of a stand-in I will be. I will just take the notes, the summary of what Luisa said. So as Aslak said, Luisa is a photojournalist who works at the Lusa News Agency, Mozambican office. The Lusa News Agency is the Portuguese news agency. She's sorry for not being able to be present, but today begins the new phase of, so the fourth phase of the fourth stage of the protests. So there have been several phases, and this is the newest one, and it's supposed to start today. And she has had already the experience last year with the homage to the rapper Azagaya when the rapper Azagaya died. At his funeral, there was already a sort of a start of youth protests and violent repression by the police. And she says that from that experience, she knows how the day goes and how long she has to stay on the street. And she feels the responsibility of covering the protests as history is being made. And here the homage of the rapper Azagaya is very important because part of what one of the slogans within this protest has been people to power or people in power, depending on how we want to say, Povo no Poder. And this was a song of the rapper Azagaya. So the pictures of Luisa cover not just the protests, but as we have seen, the first ones were the election day. She has also covered she has covered also the campaign, then the election day. This is the lawyer that was killed. She has covered the aftermath of the killing of. This is Elvino Dias and then Paulo Guambo, who was the representative of the party that is supporting Venância's candidacy. And the aftermath, which was the violence, both the police violence with tear gas and bullets, but also the response by the protesters with stones, glass, and everything that they had at hand. She says that she's scared to be present because she has to protect herself both from the police tear gas and the protesters' stones. But it is very important to be at such an historical moment. And as a woman, and a young woman at that, she stands out from her colleagues, both for the police and for the protesters. And I think I'll just let the pictures speak for themselves.
The first few pictures were sort of also reflecting maybe the fact that there are many people of many professions and categories on the streets and demonstrating peacefully, but they have also been met with bullets and tear gas. And this is what is coming now. Confrontations with the police. Quite heavy police presence in the heart of Maputo. Yeah, but it all started, yeah. So, thank you very much, Carmelisa, taking us through the pictures. The rest of the panel is here with me, Professor Helge Rønning, an emeritus at the Department of Media and Communications at the University of Oslo, as well as being associated researcher of CMI. He is a celebrated contributor to academic and public debate in literature and society in Norway for many decades, as well as in Europe and in Africa. And he has lived and worked in Mozambique, also with his late wife, Mette Mast, who was then in the role as the Norwegian ambassador to Maputo. On screen, we have Dr. Edson Cortés, who is the director of the Center for Public Integrity in Mozambique. He has also a PhD in social anthropology. He was a leading force in a civil society-based electoral observation mission called More Integrity in this year's elections. So I bet we will hear his experience from that as well. I have questions for the panel, so we'll head into that. I have always wanted to be a revolver journalist and ask and implore you to make a yes or no answer. So we'll start with that. And I'll start with Edson, I believe. Edson, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes or no? Was there electoral fraud?
Well, morning. My name is Edson, and in my opinion, we saw a huge fraud on the last election in Mozambique. And even the European Union observers and the United States observers, everyone said that the numbers that CNE released showing the victory of Frelimo, it's impossible in normal conditions, because during the election day, when the polls close, we stay in the polls watching the counting of votes, and when the counting process finished, the delegates of Frelimo in many polls, they disappear. When the results are not in favor of Frelimo, they disappear. And we don't know where they are going. And after a couple of hours, 2 or 3 of the morning, they appear and sign the new edicts without the observers. And the next day, when we are going to see the edicts, I don't know if you have this in your elections, because after the counting, all the delegates they need to sign a document showing the results in that pool. So, and we saw the end of counting showing that Podemos or Venancio Mondlane won the election in a lot of polls. But when the next day we go to see the editage, we saw different results. So this happened in a lot of places in Mozambique. Another thing that we saw is when we are going to vote in Mozambique, because the vote is in a paper, the people who are managing the elections, they give to you 2 or 3 papers, one for the presidential voting election, one for the legislative, the parliament election, and another for provincial assembly. And when they start to counting the votes, we saw that there is a lot of votes, for example, for legislative elections, or more votes for the parliamentary elections. And you ask, that is impossible. It means that someone, when they go to the polls to voting, when they go to sign, they only put the voting for parliamentary elections instead of put another voting, or put voting for presidential election instead of another voting. And when you start to count, you never have the same number of votes for presidential parliament and provincial parliament. So this is unbelievable, because you say that it's impossible that someone stay a long time in the queue, and when he going to vote, they only vote on a parliamentary election. And if you look for all the votes that when you have this kind of problem in the polls, when they start counting, all the votes are going for Frelimo or to Daniel Chapo. So there is a lot of problems on this election. For example, in Zambezia, my colleagues are reporting that when they start to count the vote, when the polls close, the chief of police at the provincial level, he appears with the police and say to the people, the delegates of opposition party, all of them are going out of the schools, because they need to start counting with only with the delegates of Frelimo and delegates of STI. So you see different strategies of defrauding elections, and the end of the day, when the CNAs start to counting the votes, the sign is evident. And now the constitutional court are facing a huge difficulties to say what really happened in this election. And before this meeting starts, I received a call of a senior advisor of Lucia Ribeiro, the president of Constitutional Court, asking me as a representative of CIP and Mas Integridad for editage. He said that we need to see more editage, and CNE doesn't give us enough editage. And if you as observers have editage, can you give us to start counting? And do you see this situation? The CNE, the electoral body, they don't have enough editage to support their decision to give a victory to Frelimo. This is tragic.
It's a
yeah
caricature of a situation. Thank you very much, Edson, for explaining so many of the irregularities. And indeed, what the messages we hear is that there has been a large variation of irregularities associated with this election. Helge, can I just frame the question slightly differently to you? Is this the first time we're hearing of this type of irregularities? Is this unique, or does it have a history?
It's not the first time. So the answer is no. Secondly, I would say that this has to be seen in the context of the history of elections in Mozambique since the introduction of the multi-party system. And I think particularly in relation to last year's local elections, which were rigged in a way that was absolutely unacceptable. And also in relation to the history before that about rigging and electoral frauds in the country. So I think that if you look at it from a historical perspective, you have to see it as a process that is now reached its culmination, and that's what we are witnessing.
Thank you very much. Turning to you, Carmelisa, I would like to ask you, let's bring us to the aftermath of the elections and the demonstrations and say a little bit more about that. Who is demonstrating or making all these political actions? And then how would you describe this? Is this something like a popular revolution or a youth revolt or a general anarchy or a festival of the oppressed? Or, as our researcher colleague João Feijó suggests, a collective catharsis? What are we witnessing?
Well, we are witnessing a lot of things, and we are witnessing a lot of changes. So there have been additions to the protests. At the basis of the protest initially, it was definitely sort of an opposition party, especially the people supporting Venancio and Podemos, and that is still a very large mass and the strongest voice of opposition. But there are many other groups that have been joining, and as you said, professional groups have been joining. We have had, and this is sort of a first, the middle class and the well-off joining. I mean, there are varying ways of joining and being favorable to a change in the regime. Many of these in the middle class and the better off are critical of Venancio. They're not necessarily supporting Venancio, but they are supporting change. I would not agree with the vision that there is a full anarchy. There are anarchical moments, but overall, there is a lot of also unity, a lot of consensus that things need to change. Venancio is setting the stage for a lot of the protests and giving ideas on how things should be done, but a lot of people have been doing things of their own volition and ideas. One of them, for example, I think it was yesterday that the lines, one of the railway lines were lifted, and I don't think that was part of the instructions. The instructions now are to use vuvuzelas, to use whistles. Before it was pans and pots, but it wasn't Venancio who asked for the pans and pots. This was an idea that came from the people, and then he just took it up. So there is sort of an exchange and contribution and general contribution. It is not just the youth movement. The youth is in the streets. Their mothers are in the streets. Their grandmothers are in the streets. So this is, my family is from Zambezia, and we have been doing it as a carnival. So everyone else is protesting and angrily. We are having a party, so it is a festival sometimes. But this is how revolutions are done. Sometimes they're done with singing and dancing.
Yeah. Yeah, let's get to this. So again, it seems like there is a tipping point, and this it's clear that the government is in no way firmly in control of the situation, except for that until now, the police's command lines seem to be holding, although what the military seems to, whether they have full command of the military is uncertain, probably. Now, let's get to the situation of discussion of what might be happening and the consequences of this for the future of democracy in Mozambique. I'm sure many people want to know about that. But first, Helge, can I ask you to inform us a little bit of this person, Venancio Mondlane, who is suddenly propelled into the center stage of politics in Mozambique?
Well, he is, I think, a man of many faces and many different backgrounds. So I don't think that he's only one person. Last year in the local elections, he ran as a candidate for mayor of Maputo for Renamo from the opposition party. And he wanted to run as a presidential candidate for Renamo this time, but he was refused by Renamo to do so. So then he ran as an independent with the support of a third party, which is a very recent formation as a party, namely Podemos. And his background is being an engineer originally, but he's also a pastor in one of the evangelical churches. And his rhetoric is very much part of that type of rhetoric that you find in the new evangelical churches, many of which have their backgrounds in Latin America and in Brazil. So he's very much a part of that kind of movement, which is a movement of not only in Mozambique, but in all the Lusophone sphere. So I think that it must be taken into account that he's not necessarily a political figure. He's very much also a figure of the churches and of the, what should I say, popular discontent with the Frelimo regime. So that this movement, I think, is more than anything, it's an expression of discontent with many years of Frelimo rule, which has not benefited the people, but a small sector of society which is related to the party and the state. So the party-state elite, which is corrupt and which is also now tricking everyone into believing that they stand for what Frelimo originally stood for, and people don't believe it any longer. So to say that this is, I think that it's important to distinguish between what is a voice of discontent with the situation and what is a voice of support for Venancio Mondlane.
Support for Venancio Mondlane seems to be one thing, but Edson, can I ask you, is there a way of assessing real support for Frelimo at the moment?
Asla, can you come again, please?
Yes. Helge just spoke about this, the possible support for Venancio Mondlane. Do you have a way of balancing how much support there is for Frelimo? Can Frelimo lean on any political constituency to resolve this crisis?
Well, for the first time in Mozambique, you appear in the public domain as with a jersey of Frelimo or defending Frelimo, supporting Frelimo. It will be a kind of threat to you, because people, we saw a lot of videos that even in Chapa saying, Chapa, it's a local public transport bus, and we saw in a lot of Chapas and people who were wearing Frelimo jersey, the bus stop and people saying to the people, go out of the bus. So it's very difficult to see who support Frelimo now. And I think 2 weeks ago, Frelimo asked people, their supporters in Maputo, to go out and make a demonstration. And we know that a lot of people who appear in this demonstration are forced by Frelimo leaders, and many of them in their WhatsApp group chats, they talk that they are forced to be there, and because they know that there is a lot of people who are against Frelimo, so it's very difficult to see who are the supporters when, for example, we have a lot of demonstration where people, professionals, who are saying that appeared in public domain. For example, now in the public schools, the exams started, but the teachers, they appear and say that we don't give, we are not in the classroom because we are not paid. We saw the same thing related with doctors, nurses, and judges, magistrates. Everybody complained about the last 10 years of Frelimo governance. And with this, it's very difficult to understand how this party can achieve 700% of the votes in the polls. It's impossible. It means that we're suffering from Stockholm syndrome, or we are so stupid that we are complaining about the way that Frelimo are ruling the country, but in the end of the day, when we have election, we are voting on them. So it's very difficult to believe, to even in when we are talking with the mamanas, the old ladies, they are saying, but who voting in them? Because no one appeared in public domain saying that I voting for Frelimo. But the big problem that I saw now in our society is a kind of radicalization, because there is a people who say that we need to stop this kind of demonstration, and other people saying that we are suffering so much time that we need to do something now, or this business, we return in the situation of business as usual, and Frelimo continue to ruling the country in the same way.
Thank you, Edson. I want to bring us towards the discussion of what we could see as the role of the international community in this situation. But to put that discussion in a perspective, then I would like to ask the panel, about exactly this question of where we are now at the tipping point between democracy and more autocracy. So the argument could go that if we look at the revolutionary moments of the Arab Spring, and more recently in Sudan, we are all a bit frightened of this possibility of this revolutionary situation ending in a chaotic. So what is in store for us? Will Frelimo restore a heavy-handed dictatorship by force of arms, or will this end in a not in Frelimo but post-revolutionary dictatorship under Venancio or someone else? Or will it result in a military coup with a junta up front, or something to that tune? Or is it possible that we could end up in a situation of a democracy or a constitution after a constitutional moment, perhaps, and brought about by a national conference and a real chance of democratic reorganization of society? Personally, I think that it looks like there's no return to like the situation we were at in September. Something else is going to come out of it. But my guess is as good as anyone else's, and or rather probably worse. But I would like to invite the rest of you to make your assessments. What's your hunch, so to say?
You want me to start, or
no? Helge, please to start. You have
First of all, I'm very skeptical about all these kind of comparisons between what is happening in Mozambique and what has been happening in the Arab countries. I think that's a comparison that we can't really make because the situation is so different from what it was during the Arab Spring. That's my first point. The second point is also that I don't think that we can compare the situation in Mozambique to the situation that was in the Sudan. I think the societies are so different, the political systems are so different. So I think what we can make as comparisons is probably with the countries in Southern Africa that have been ruled by former liberation movements for 50 years or so. That is a comparison that can be made. And based on that, I do think that what we are seeing in Mozambique now is something that we've been seeing in other countries in Southern Africa for quite some time, namely a growing discontent with the former liberation movements as governing parties in what is becoming more and more corrupt states and a corrupt elite that is ruling people that are discontent with the situation. And there are some resolutions to that. One is that we can go the Zimbabwean way, which is through a sort of military coup. Or we could go a way that has been the situation, which would be the optimal situation, the Botswana way, where there's a peaceful transition of power through an election. Though Botswana was not really a state like the others, because it didn't have an armed liberation movement. So the comparison between Botswana is not really there. Or we could have a situation where we find ourselves in a kind of Angolan situation where the party continues to rule, but they continue to rule after not such a blatant cheating at the elections. They should cheat just a little in order to stay in power. Or we could get a new, totally different situation, which would be a Mozambican situation, which the optimistic thing would be that, like someone has proposed in Mozambique, that one has a kind of meeting of interested parties, both from the political parties, from Frelimo and all the other political parties, civil society representatives, and people who are leaders in civil society as such, to discuss what can be done. And then we could have a government of national unity or something like that coming out of it. But it's very difficult to say, because at the moment we have a situation which is very, on the one hand, we have a rebellion. On the other hand, we have a stability. I mean, I've been in touch with people in Maputo who says, well, we're going to the restaurants as usual. At the same time as there are lots of demonstrations in the streets. You know, this is a very labile situation. It's not a clear-cut situation.
Can I then ask the Mozambicans on the panel, what do you see as the chances here for a new constitutional moment in parallel with a transitional government of sorts to come across? I
also think it's very important that one has a new election soon, a new proper election.
Just one fact here is that we are waiting now for the official pronouncement of the electoral result by first we have heard them from the national election body. And now we are waiting for the Constitutional Court, which is the final institution, to pronounce the result, the official results. And
23rd of December.
We think.
Yeah.
Okay. It's very strange that we have to wait 2 months for that. But okay. Again, what do you see as the chances for this leading into a constitutional moment and a transitional justice? A transitional government?
Well, we Mozambicans usually say that Mozambique is not for the faint of heart. And we are dramatic in the sense that things emotionally dramatic, but maybe not as violent as in Kenya or in South Africa. We have had a death toll, which for us is high, but comparatively to other countries, it's relatively low. So there will be change. It will probably will not be as satisfactory and not as dramatic as we hope, especially after so much upheaval, so after so much this show of discontent. It will be slow. It will be slower than we hope for. It will not be a dramatic change. That is what I think. And unfortunately, I think that actually the solution has to come from within Frelimo. So Frelimo has to decide within themselves to step back and either be part of the opposition or be part of a coalition, a sort of a reconciliation, transitional moment. But Frelimo has to accept that it's no longer the owner of the ball. So there has been this discussion of the rich kid on the block who has the ball, and then the football only happens when they are present and they dictate the rules. So they need to accept that they are no longer the owner of the ball. And this is what is important to happen, for change to happen.
Thank you. Edson, can I ask you to answer the same question quite quickly, because we have to move to questions from the audience here, if there are any. But can you take us through that? What is your assessment of where this is going? Is it leading into a transitional moment, or where is it heading? And I also would like to ask you to end with a consideration of what do you think should be the role, or what has been the role of the international community present in Maputo? Is it being constructive, or is it being is it helping the process along, or does it have other priorities?
Well,
big questions.
Well, I think we witnessed the end of post-colonial era because we saw the young voters in the street. They're asking for to change the public, the way that Frelimo made public policy looking for themselves are no longer acceptable for these young people, because we need better schools, better education, better roads, and the opportunity the better opportunities, job opportunities. So the people are done. People are saying that we are done with you. And we, in the streets, we never heard that we want that constitutional court or CNA reduce the number of seats in the parliament for the Frelimo. No, they are saying you must go. Frelimo must go. So, and I think the international community, the Mozambique partners, they need to understand this. They need to hear what the people in the streets are saying, because for me, I don't know what the Constitution Council will say on 23 of December, I think so. But maybe on after 23, we can have a war in the streets if the Constitutional can say the Frelimo won the elections.
Not Christmas?
And
Christmas
sorry?
Christmas is cancelled.
Yeah, but Venancio said that Christmas is cancelled. So maybe we have a war and after 23 on the streets, because now we have a fighting between young people and the police. And maybe one day these young people get the guns of the police. And if they get the guns, we can start to have a violence in the urban areas. So it's for me, we need to go to a solution that we cancel these elections. We put a government of Unidad Nacional,
National unity.
national unit, and for 1 year, and we need to make a reforms, and huge reforms on our electoral budget, because it's unacceptable that, for example, here in France, I went to visit the Minister of Interior, who run and manage the elections. They use the same system that Mozambique used to in their elections. You need to register as a elector. They have a paper vote. On last May, they held the elections. 32.9 million people going to vote. They counting, and the end of the day, they announce the results. We have election with 7 million people, and now we are in December. We don't have the final results. This is unacceptable. And for other hand, we saw companies as an Italian multinational who explore gas in Cabo Delgado, trying to sign a new deal with the Mozambique government, who are in the end of his term. So what kind of message that NI sent to the Mozambicans? The contract they want to sign is a contract who benefit the NI. And you say that, and in Mozambique, we are starting to say, if the international communities appear after the Venezuelan election and say that this government are not legitimate, why they accept Frelimo doing this? And we saw a lot of people in the streets shooting by the police, or a lot of people dying with all these demonstration in the streets. So for me, it's it will be very difficult to accept that in the end of the day, if the Constitutional Council say that, okay, these elections, Frelimo won the election and Daniel Chapo won the elections, and the European Union appear and say, okay, this is the legitimate government of Mozambique. For us, it will be very difficult to accept this, because in the streets, people are saying that we are not. And you heard what happened with Chatham House when they announced the invitation of Chapo as our president. The way that people demonstrate their unhappiness of that. So it will be very difficult to accept a government of Frelimo. They need to realize that we need to reform. We need to introduce the new rule of the game in Mozambique.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Edson. There is so much to comment and say on this situation, but it seems there are questions in the chat, or are there? And I also would like to open for that, and there's questions in the audience in the room. So
let's take one from the chat first. How can Mozambique solve the fear of the political elites, perhaps not just the domestic elites, but international ones, for potential revenge and loss of benefits?
Oh, me. The Mozambicans are not afraid anymore. So it's the elites who are afraid of losing their benefits. So yeah, fear is gone.
Interesting. Were there more questions or from the audience? Elin?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for a very interesting panel on a country that we know too little about. I mean, there have been a couple of articles on Mozambique lately, one by Aslak. But I think this is a country that is unknown to too many people in Norway. And I have a couple of questions. One is there any history of violent repression in Mozambique. So when you talk about tanks in the streets and tear gas, is this a new thing or is this something that has been happening? Because that has to do with, the government response and the military and the police response and the control over arms that you touched upon in the panel. I like the anthropologist's political solution, which means the main domestic party has to sort of back down and say, listen, we have lost, what do we do now? Because it seems to me like opposition is not only coming from Renamo, it's also coming from within the party itself. Right. And then I have a question to the media specialist on the panel. You were talking about the weakening of the former freedom movements in Southern Africa in general. And my question is, to what extent is what we are witnessing a spillover effect? Why is this happening now in a span of very, very few years, where the ruling parties for 50, 60 years are now losing elections and having to step down voluntarily or with force? Does it have anything to do with the way communication is happening and the way opposition is now organizing, which is different from previously? I'll stop there. Thanks.
Many questions, but I'd like to pass the word to you, Helge. You have seen most sunsets of all of us, and you may be able to speak about the history of repression.
Well, first of all, to the last question, I think that the question about communication systems is essential here. I do think that the opportunity to communicate through what is being called social media, it's not a term that I like very much, but what is being called social media is essential here, not only here, but also elsewhere. And I think the communication situation is part of how the communication between various groups in the society takes place, and that it's been essential. That's the pictures that we saw, they're being distributed. Venancio Mondlane's pronouncements are on YouTube, etc. So that's very, very important. But it doesn't explain everything. When the Arab Spring took place, people said, oh, it's because of the social media. It was not because of the social media. It was because of discontent. This is an uprising because of discontent, not because of the media. The media is a tool in relation to how this is being organized and how it plays out. That's my first. The question about whether there's been oppression in Mozambique over the years. Yes, there has been all the way since independence and before independence. There is a war going on in Mozambique right now. And we shouldn't forget that at the same time as there are demonstrations in the rest of the country. In the north of the country, there is a war, might be called a full-fledged civil war, but it's at least a low-key civil war going on, which has also influenced the discontent with the government in the rest of the country, which has to be taken into account. And then why this form of liberation movements now face a crisis is partly because there's a whole new generation that has now partly taken to the streets, but also entered into society in a manner which did not happen before. That's what we see in South Africa. The born free generation have started to make their voice heard in South Africa. That's what we see in Zimbabwe. So this is part of the reason.
Thank you. There are still a couple of questions in the chat, and there's one from the audience. So I think that we will, before we round up, we'll just collect those questions and then return the word to the panel. Can you please read out the questions on the...
Can we take one from here?
Yes, yes, of course.
It's just a question about the, I mean, I can follow your points about there's a growing discontent with the ruling parties in the face of, corruption, mismanagement, and all the rest of it, and then the development challenges, poverty, unemployment. But one striking thing to me is also that the younger generation, the born frees, the urban middle classes, they are, politically speaking, not just a sack of potatoes. They go in all different directions. I mean, the born free in South Africa, I mean, they were partly characterized by apathy and, they abstained from the elections. But to the extent they were politically mobilized, they went to the most corrupt populist parties in that country and supported them. So that takes me to the question in Mozambique, which I don't know. You, Carmelisa, said, that the key factor here is how Frelimo will respond and what happens inside Frelimo. And I intuitively agree with that. But what can you say about the political forces outside Frelimo? Who is going to take this forward from the other side?
So, as I said, can we collect the two other questions? Can you memorize that and then collect the last few questions?
We have one here. In Maputo, it has been possible to observe some operational differences between the PRM and the armed forces, with the police often handling the demonstrations more violently. Do you agree with this observation? If so, how can we explain these differences?
Yes.
And there's another one there. Is there potential for mediation by respected Mozambikians? Are there any challenges to overcome?
So the latter question for you, Helge, but can you please start, Carmelisa, about the differences between the police, the army, and Elling's question about where the youth is going politically?
Yeah, so interestingly, Podemos is a spillover of Frelimo in a way. It's not a strong spillover. It's a weak spillover. They tried to run with the son of late President Samora Machel, but he wasn't as courageous as Venancio and didn't take it forward, his candidacy, if he wanted to be a candidate for the municipal elections. So it is a new force. It's not a known force, and it has been Venancio who has propelled their visibility. Venancio is a populist candidate, with all the characteristics of a pastor, of a charismatic pastor, and populist candidates have been popular across the board with the young people. The issue is that the votes have been cast generally against Frelimo rather than for the opposition. So Renamo has won some of the municipalities, not because Renamo was desired, but because Frelimo was not desired. And there has been constant criticism towards the weakness of our opposition parties. I personally think that currently we have perhaps, yes, very weak opposition parties, but our ruling party is also not strong because it has weakened their strong forces. So the moderates, the intellectuals, they have been weakened. So it has been hollowed. So currently we just have weak politicians across the board. The stronger voices are actually in the civil society. So political activity being done outside parties. That is the strongest, more organized and stronger way of doing politics. And I think that has been happening also in South Africa or in other countries in which the youth prefer to organize outside parties in many ways. So this would be my answer. I'm not sure if I answered completely. The other one about the police and the army, I don't know if Edson wants to say something about that. I have opinions, but I want Edson to say things.
Well, after the general accord of peace, Mozambique, one of the terms of this agreement between the government of Frelimo government and Renamo, it will be that they disinvest on our army, so they put a lot of resource in the public police, and now the chief of the police, he is a Makonde. In my opinion, he is the vice president of Mozambique. He's a strong ally of News, Mr. Bernardino Rafael. That's why when he ordered the police to go to the streets and shooting, the police must obey their orders, or it will be the police who don't agree with Bernardino Rafael will suffer the consequence of their act. Instead of the army is more weak. And now, for example, I think 1 month ago, we saw one general who appeared in the public domain in university, Joaquim Chissano University, talk about the war in Cabo Delgado. This general said that the war in Cabo Delgado, it's a kind of joke, because they decide the strategy, military strategy, when they are in their farms drinking and have a fun, the president and the Bernardino Rafael. And instead of send the army for the field, they prefer, in the beginning of the conflict, they prefer to send the police. And they talk a lot about this. And someone recording on a video and release this, and people watching on social media. After this, Mr. News removed this general and sent him to the reserve. And this is a kind of thing, and a lot of soldiers appears in social media approving the message that this general said. So we saw that even in the contest of the police, we saw that the Makondes, they predominant, they control the police. That's why the police are so brutal with the people on the streets. Yeah.
That was a great answer, Edson. And Helge, would you like to have a few words of rounding this all off?
Well, first of all, I would like to emphasize that you cannot treat Mozambique as just part of another model or another. It is Mozambique, and it's happening in Mozambique. So we have to treat it and analyze it as Mozambique, with the history of Mozambique and with the situation in Mozambique per se. I would just like to point out one thing which I think is very important. When I did some research on the liberty of the press and freedom of expression in Africa, Mozambique came out as being one of the freest countries when it comes to freedom of expression. And that's a very important part of it, because that's what we're actually seeing now when we're sitting here discussing the situation and what is happening inside Mozambique now, where people actually communicate about what is happening right now in the country.
Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. There's so many more things we could say, but this was unfortunately all that we had time for within this hour. So a great thank you to the panelists, Edson on screen, as well as to the audience on screen and in the room. Thank you very much, and have a great day, all of you.